Welcome to the Banff World Media Festival. Your session is about to begin.
Thank you. Thank you to the Banff Festival, to Amy and Jesse for arranging all this. I'm Jody Simon. I'm an entertainment lawyer in LA. Is the volume okay? Okay. The panels previous to this one, I think, have focused on the value of branded content to advance the marketing interests of the brands. We're going to drill down a little bit in this and talk about two other topics. One is kind of the process of creation, how content originates, who produces it, and another that's kind of a new problem, I think, for brands is, okay, now I've produced this content, I own it, what else can I do with it? And is there other value to be done? How's that ancillary revenue shared? Questions like that. So to start, I'll introduce my panel. First is Mike Wiese, who is Director of Branded Entertainment at JWT. You'll remember his great Macy's presentation from this morning. Lynn, Director of Content at BBDO. Matt DiPaola, who is the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer at our good friend MediaCom. And James Milward, founder and president of The Secret Location. So, well, let's get underway. So, in our earlier conversations, I mean, the classic agency model was, from a production standpoint, was fee for production services, and you'd hand it over, and that would be that. How is that changing with this new branded entertainment space, and how is that? You want to start off?
Yeah, I mean, I think that model still exists, the work-for-hire production agreement that we'll get involved with. But I think now more than ever, I think clients, I think just take a step backwards. There's clients that have, with our clients, we have in-scope and out-of-scope work. So when we sign a deal, when we establish a contract with our client, in that scope of work, we'll define everything that we're going to be doing for them. And so therein are the opportunities that we aim for. And then outside of that contract, where there's the more speculative, entrepreneurial type opportunities that we can be developing. And that's where agencies and I think partners that we work with are developing new ideas, new concepts, new platforms, new prototypes, if you will, that we can have ownership in, that have just different financial models to it, because it's not based on a preset scope of work and contract and fee structure that the clients have established. And one thing to kind of know with a creative agency, at least, is in general, everything we do, we originate, the clients will own. So it's often, there's a lot of, now there's more and more interest to have positions and ideas and IP. So it's now more than ever that we're looking to get more defined in what we consider part of the in-scope agreement and what we consider outside of the scope. And that will be driven by what the kind of the investment we're willing to make into it.
So I think, a lot of the times, the agency will be conceiving a program idea either internally or from an outside pitch and bringing it to the
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a creative agency, and Teddy can speak to this as well, I think that our task is to make things and to get ideas originated, and we will co-create with other partners. But the reason a client hires a BBDO or a JWT is for the creative thinking that we bring to the table, and the people and the relationships and the execution that we can get done.
Well, what's been your experience?
Yeah, so if I can chime in. So the basic way we work is our client comes to us with a brief and says, we need to make X. And traditionally it's been TV spots, print ads, it's been basic stuff. There are very few clients still that are coming to us and saying, we'd like to make a TV show, we'd like to make a feature. There are few. So our opportunities in that space tend to come from when we bring them an idea that's off brief. And in that context, we can talk about different ownership models because it's out of scope in the way that Mike was explaining. So we can partner with a content creator who may retain some ownership. They might share it with us. We might work something out with a brand because it's not us working under our contract creating.
So how much will the agency invest in development or production in order to retain? How far will you cook a project before you bring it to an agency, I guess, to a client?
We'll kick, I mean, I think when you factor in the time of staff and the fact that every person's overhead in an agency, and if you factor in the investment that we're making in people to think and create, and we're not charging anyone for that time, it could be quite significant. I mean, then we'll also kick in some dollars to produce presentation reels or prototypes that will help sell the idea. But you know, for the most part, I think it's going to come from a time of staff allocation and not billing, you know, assuming that's our write-off, is to try to get those ideas generated.
I think, just to jump in on that, I think that what's lacking in a lot of agencies right now is that person or that role that can play almost like a business analyst role and look at an idea, a creative idea or a technology idea or a media idea, and assess it, what the business opportunity is, so you can kind of present that back up to the senior management of the company saying, okay, we think the revenue opportunity is, and this is what we should invest into it. And I think there's a lot of cases where a lot of agencies will feel really passionate about something, feel really passionate about the creative. There may be, you know, it's a way to get, you know, to build a great case study to get more business. It's a way to win some awards, to get some profile. But there isn't enough diligence in the agency world right now to really look at what is the business opportunity and what's the proper way to invest. And it's a huge, I think it's a huge white space opportunity for a lot of agencies that are looking to get into more IP space.
Well, what specifically, because of course we've had many presentations this morning about many innovative transmedia campaigns that clearly have been shepherded by agencies, and I suppose originated by them really in many cases. So what are you talking about that's different from that?
So if you look at you're creating platforms or properties, and there's actually a revenue model on that the agency can get. So if you're going to sell advertising on it, or if you're going to create something that, you know, much like the TV model, you may run it in one country and then try and monetize it by distributing it in other countries. You want to set those models up off the top. And I think, you know, back to some of the conversations that started earlier, our current contracts with a lot of our clients right now, you know, they pay us for work, and then the work is created, and they own the work regardless of which market they decide to distribute it in. So when we as an agency create an ad campaign, and that client wants to now run that same campaign in another market, we don't get more money for that. They own that, and they run it, and they may, you know, translate, which is very different than obviously how the TV model works. And I think so, if you can start those conversations up front and set it in the contract where it's like, okay, we're going to create this thing, and we're going to take some ownership, and you're going to own the rights for this in this market. If you want to run it here, then there's going to be a cost for that. And I think a lot of these conversations need to start off the top on, okay, how can we monetize this idea? And let's set up the parameters up front that we all agree to before we kind of go off and build it.
Well, I'll double back to that, but let me let James get in, because you're the panelist, not from an agency position. So why don't you say a little bit about where you fit into this equation?
Sure. So my company would be classified as a digital agency, but we're a little different in that we're project oriented, so we're not under retainer. So for us, every single project we undertake is a question of what are we trying to achieve for both our company and also for the client. So I think for us, the way we work is that we sort of have three different types of work we do. We work in the brand and advertising space. So in that space, we'll work with traditional agencies, and it's very much a service role. So we typically don't own any IP when we work with an agency for all of the reasons that these guys have described. When we work directly with a brand, depending on what we're developing, we can have a conversation about IP. Obviously, I think that the easiest way to describe owning IP is if somebody's willing to pay for the whole thing, you typically aren't going to own that much of it. And if you're taking them something that you've invested some time or some money in, or that you're asking them to pay a portion of or a license for, then you're going to be able to own some IP out of it. And then I think the bigger question is, what's the value of that IP, and how do you model that as quickly as possible to know whether it's worth owning the IP or whether you just want profit sharing, for instance. But for us in the entertainment sphere, it's a little different, because in Canada, we work as a digital producer with television producers as well. So we can access elements like the Canada Media Fund and the Bell Fund to create and actually fund the digital extensions for TV shows. So under that circumstance, we'll typically own the IP or a portion of the IP for the digital rights, and then we'll have some profit participation in exploiting those digital rights along with the television show as it goes in different territories. And then when we build original technology, which is sort of like the things that we completely invest in as projects that we either going to go direct to a consumer with or as a B2B, we own the whole IP unless we're going in with a partnership or we're bringing some venture capital money into it. And then the modeling becomes even more specific. So we've had to build essentially like a mini VC evaluation model within our company for how do we determine what's worth putting our time and attention into in terms of developing complete IP where we own everything, whereby the way I would differentiate that is there isn't sort of like something on the horizon that we can immediately see where we can sell that to a client or a brand or in the entertainment space, but it's something that we see as a big opportunity. So we actually have a template in our office called the IP evaluation grid, and it's a series of questions that you ask yourself and can be run up the line by anybody who thinks of an idea, so that there's a process for how to know whether and how to evaluate the validity of the idea and how we can monetize it. So we have a whole spectrum, and I should also say, just to add one more layer of complication to my side of this panel, when I think of IP, I don't just think of content or video content. I'm talking technology as well. So I'm talking games that we might monetize in the iTunes App Store, digital extensions for television shows, which might have a new format that the format could actually be exploited beyond just the execution with that show. And then in the brand space, depending on what we're developing, sometimes that's core underlying technology that could be white labeled, and sometimes it's consumer facing.
Well, that would be a wrinkle for all of you. Let's get into that a little.
I think it's worth clarifying the way a brand thinks about ownership too, because we use that word really loosely. And in fact, in my experience, brands mostly aren't looking for revenue. They're not looking to monetize. They're looking for control. That's why they want ownership. It's a problem for a brand if they invest in a piece of entertainment or a piece of technology that somehow is telling a story of theirs that stops, because brands change their story all the time. So they need to be able to ensure that something doesn't live on after they've stopped messaging a specific story. Or they need to make sure that in another country where their brand strategy is different, this project can't live without their permission. They tend to be more interested in that side of the ownership than they do in the revenue, because mostly brands are using marketing dollars to do this, and as long as a piece of content or piece of technology is serving a marketing need, that's sufficient.
And just to build on that too, most clients aren't set up to receive revenue on that content. Maybe the exceptions of, P&G has what was their soap opera division, that's now their branded entertainment division, so they are set up to actually as a production company. And you've got Red Bull, obviously does a lot of their own original content, but other than those two, most brands, if they got into business around it and they received a check from that content, they wouldn't know what to do with it.
I think the same can be said for agencies as well. I mean, I don't think many agencies, our business model is not to administer the rights and execute the rights and exploit them for IP. I mean, we want to be participants, and there's things where we can do better, and we can have an active participation in how those get exploited. But for the most part, if it's being created outside of the scope, or it's like West Virginia, for example, we have that discussion with the client, and the truth is, we don't want to own West Virginia. We just want to be a participant in the upside to good ideas. And there's a lot of ways you can slice that up and have that be,
But I think where I'll challenge that a little bit too is I think within kind of our world within WPP, we've got, you mentioned earlier, Group M, Peter Tortorici and Group M Entertainment. And we've actually got, so Group M, so there's WPP as a holding company, then all the media companies fall into Group M. Peter Tortorici has a production fund, so he can fund IP, and for the people here in Banff can fund content ideas to bring them to market. And what they do is, they'll fund a portion of the production, and in exchange, when they bring that to a broadcaster or to a internet, platform like Facebook or YouTube or someone, they will then, in exchange, the money they've invested, take in exchange advertising impressions. And then the Group M agencies can then resell that media to their clients to make margin on that. So that's where WPP starts to take ownership within helping bring IP to market and take a bit of IP ownership. And then if that idea then goes market to market, Group M Entertainment will take a cut of that IP as they help bring it to each market.
Yeah, and I think we do the same. I mean, it's all about just getting cuts and being in a position to be able to exploit it.
But who manages it the brands clearly don't know how to distribute
Yeah.
programming. You guys have just said, we're not really in that business. I guess James knows how to do it.
I think for us as well, like when you start to look at IP beyond just content, you start to look at, how you can have a recurring revenue model, how you can start to grow a brand in and of itself out of the piece of technology or the piece of the product you essentially create out of IP. So for me, like the way we talk about what we work on and what we're trying to work on is strategic brand ecosystems, which hopefully isn't too gnarly of a buzzword for this room, but we're thinking of the actual content property as a brand and how we can exploit that content property on many channels, and then how we can monetize that. And we are set up to help facilitate that monetization, so that if an agency, and we've had this where agencies have wanted to develop, so that and a couple years ago there was sort of a split where the agencies like Anomaly popped up, where they were like part and parcel trying to create products with their brand partners as well as do advertising for them. And how that's worked and shaken out is, it's up for each agency to determine, but for us, we can become a conduit. So the way we describe ourselves is we can help accelerate a story, or we can help accelerate technology as a third party, so that if you guys as an agency aren't ready to set up and try to bring in revenue and reorganize your massive organization to be able to do that, we can help become a channel or an experimental channel for you to try that model, see how it works. If it's working, we'll participate with you, and if it's really working, then you take that to the next level and you do it by yourself, likely.
And when you look at, there's Anomaly's a great example, and I think you look at agencies like RGA, who, they do a ton of great work for Nike. Everyone's familiar with all of, the chip that goes in your running shoe and the Nike Fuel Band, all these great things that Nike's been coming out with. So RGA absolutely gets hired fee for service to do creative work for Nike. In addition to that, in their contract, they also set up these offsites where they do these patent offsites, and they allow their teams to come up with ideas and business ideas that they pitch to Nike, and Nike then buys the patent for the idea from them and then goes and produces it.
So, but what you described, which is Peter Todorici's fund and RGA's setup, is all about trying to manage our conflict of interest, right? Which is that we're paid for our time, and yet we want to be rewarded for something that has a lasting effect that we make during that time, and it's difficult. So we either have to separate our business and create a separate fund, or we have to think first of our clients and hopefully have ideas where there's a byproduct that is monetizable, or where there's a royalty to be had, or we have to just try and work completely out of scope, and it's difficult. What we try and do is stand in the middle. Every good project, as the last panel I think said, usually has a lot of people like us involved between a brand and content creators. And the key is we need to try and make sure that the people who are best at their specific function are doing that function. It tends to be that content creators are the best at monetizing their content. And so we need to leave that. We need to incentivize those creators to do that. We just don't want to get shut out.
So when there is an ancillary, you will leave distribution rights, if not copyright, but some distribution rights and revenue participation in the hands of the production company, essentially.
I think the key is shared revenue and then very specific controls. Brands won't let go of all control.
Yeah, and they'll own the copyright too, I imagine, since they're funding it.
They can.
Yeah.
They, to be honest, they're more caught up with the fact that they've been advised they need to own it than with understanding the implications of what it is.
Right.
And the value of owning it as well, right? Like, because owning a piece of intellectual property, like everyone wants to conceptually own things, but what is the value of owning something? Because if you're just talking about a long tail of revenue, then you can share in profit. That's easy. If you're talking about owning something that eventually has value in and of itself, that you might be able to sell or to exit from in some way, that's a whole different conversation about what it takes to build long-term equity value, and how do you organize that within your other organization. And I think that's why it gets really complicated for traditional agencies who have a retainer model, and they have even just systematic workflows in terms of how the division of labor is broken out, to start trying to think about how those properties can be built internally and exploited to the furthest extent, and create the furthest extent of that value with them.
Yeah. Well, we had a good case study this morning with the Macy's, and setting aside the TV special, there's the DVD and the book sale. Yeah. How is that structured? Did you
Well,
lay that
yeah,
off on-
we went to them and we had that conversation, but without going into details of the master agreement.
Yeah.
But we're better off just as a agency relationship in that case. I mean, it's one of those, it's that project is one of many, many projects.
Right.
So it wasn't probably worth the disruption of the current agreement to go in another direction. Now, there's other ideas that are clearly, and that also originated out of the brief, as Teddy alluded to, is like the brief, that strategy was about the Believe campaign and was tied to other work. Now, if we went to Macy's with, hey, we just want to do something for, action sports, something like what a Red Bull would do, because they want to hit millennials. And we just pitch them, here's a show, and we want to pitch it, and you know what? I think we can sell it to a network, and then I think we get a concert tour out of it, et cetera, et cetera. We would have a position to have.
We can help you finance
Yeah,
it.
yeah, and we could. I would be able to find people to bring, to help get involved on a financial side. They would be wide open to that, I believe. It's, but when it originates out of the brand strategy, it's very hard to separate it.
And I suppose the actual production of the book was simple. You just found.
Yeah,
somebody
actually,
to
the
do it.
production of the book that was with the publisher.
So that's just a conventional.
It was a deal. We put
Yeah.
together the deal with the publisher. The publisher has rights to distribute the book. Macy's participates in that.
Right.
The publisher gets that. We're in there too, but it's
Right.
I mean, I can give you an example. A few years ago, I made a branded animated Christmas special for Ocean Spray. And Ocean Spray financed it, and they own the special. But they wanted a song. The right target audience, the right songwriter was Barry Manilow. We asked Barry Manilow if he'd write a song. We said, we'd pay your studio time, you can own your own song. And he said, absolutely. The agency and the brand own a small royalty on his song, but it's his job to monetize that song. And it ended up on his albums and in places where we couldn't have gotten it. So the brand and the agency benefit from the song. In return, it's the brand and the distribution partner's job to monetize the show, where Barry owns no royalties. And so it's tricky. Every one of these deals is different. And the key is you got to make sure that the person who is best suited to monetize is incentivized to monetize.
And what's adding even kind of more complexity within the Canadian market is you've got obviously all the tax credit situation and all the government funding that happens for a lot of Canadian content. And for a lot of that to work, for the models to work the way they currently are today, a lot of the production companies and content producers need to maintain IP ownership in order to make sure that they can get the funding and the tax credits. The window of opportunity for brands and agencies that want to kind of get into that, but still play a role without kind of getting in the way of the funding is a lot of the IP ownership still only applies to broadcast content. So a lot of the production companies will still maintain IP for the broadcast distribution of something. However, a lot of the agencies and media companies can start to get in and start to fund things and take a little bit of the IP ownership into digital platforms or into mobile platforms, into social platforms.
So you can still access credits even for the digital content, even with the hybrid ownership?
Yeah.
Yeah, the tax credits are tricky. And it depends on your province and it depends on the regulation, but they can be tricky. Most of the tax credits are broken up into I own the copyright or I'm a service company working on eligible material. But more so the funds require that the new media producer have ownership or co-ownership of the IP, and that is an opportunity, I think. And it's also, I think, conceptually, if a lot of people here are traditional television producers or conceptually, if you're great at making TV and you obviously want to own the brand of your television show, that makes complete sense. And everybody probably wants to own as much of what they have created as possible. However, to Teddy's point, the bottom line is who's the best served and who's the best suited to monetize portions of that brand, which is the content vehicle. And so when you start to look at partners or companies like ours that can help accelerate a traditional or narrative into digital spaces or into monetizable digital spaces, you have to ask yourself, isn't it worth giving up some IP ownership of that if the person you're giving it up to is more skilled than I am at executing and exploiting it, and also is going to be more incented over the long run to continue to work on it, especially if there isn't revenue pickup immediately. And most of the conversations that I have, when it's framed that way, it makes sense and they want to engage. Because at the end of the day, they're best at making television programs, and they're the best at monetizing those television programs. They aren't the best at doing that in digital formats. And so they want to work with the best to give the best chance of success. And then when you have that sort of unified marriage and everyone knows their roles and responsibilities, it's still the same singular brand property as a content vehicle that you're projecting. Like, it's not about two people going down two different roads trying to exploit it separately, but it's about both being incented to monetize on their platforms with the maximum amount of proficiency.
Well, this is potentially, I imagine this is the kind of ancillary exploitation of this kind of content is already a small percentage of what is a small but growing percentage of overall the advertising world. But it's potentially really interesting because a TV network makes its money off exploiting the content as content and collecting revenue from that. So they're going to be, I would think, much potentially more aggressive than, as you guys said, the brand gets its value from the brand exposure, and they're not really looking for this ancillary revenue from the exploitation of the program as a program. So I would think for suppliers, it's potentially an interesting new model with maybe more potential revenue for them, because you agencies and brands might not be, it's not your main focus, so you might not be as interested in pulling out the maximum share of that ancillary revenue. And since the exploitation is not strictly in your expertise, you're relying on the content creator anyway.
That's
Okay.
definitely true in theory.
I guess that wasn't a question.
It's true. That's true in theory. The brands are aware that if they're financing something for a distributor and a distributor's making a lot of money on it, they want some compensation. Now, if a brand is funding something on NBC, they're going to want that in media credits, not in cash, because cash is hard to handle. But they're going to want something.
Well, something, yeah.
Yeah. Similarly, agencies, if it was their idea, they're going to want something. The opportunity lies if to sort of expand the pie rather than to shut people out. So if we can get content creators who are very savvy about this landscape, which is why we're all here talking about it, because we want content creators to play with us. Mm-hmm. And if we can start bringing bigger, broader ideas to our brands that aren't in our scope, that aren't just standard TV spots and print ads, we have the ability to create a whole new business model, and one which everyone can benefit. And as the move happens from television to digital, that everyone's been predicting forever and is still moving slowly, that's where the opportunity lies to redefine the payouts.
Let me just circle back briefly because to a process question. I know agencies have projects being pitched to them all the time. Oh, this will be great digital project if I can just get a sponsor, or a TV show. Are you incubating your own show ideas as well internally?
Yeah, definitely. I think being a creative agency where you have a lot of creativity in the house, not everyone's capable or thinking about these formats and content. But I mean, I have a dozen clients or more, and probably everyone there's some entertainment property or IP or content or platform property that is in discussion or development. Most likely being originated or sort of inspired by something inside, and I'll contribute to that. And then there's also a number of opportunities that are outside with relationships, and it's a relationship business. So there's suppliers, people that we like, who I trust, will say, hey, look, you know the brand, you know how we operate, let's put your thoughts on this, let's co-create and co-develop. And it's really thinking like, a studio or a production company and developing a slate of opportunities. And I'm trying to build slates against every client, knowing that one of them may go, and then those that do go may be in scope or out of scope, and those then have the business models that come with that. And then, taking pictures all the time and talking to people, and I think at the end of the day, it's the people that I think understand the business approach, know that it's not about sponsorship and we're not writing checks, we're not a bank, which I think is still surprising how often people will come to me saying, you get your logo here and you get to have, it's like, doesn't work that way. And those that really understand our business and are the ones that are successful. I think we were talking earlier about Ben Silverman, who's had success on Madison Avenue and obviously in Hollywood. And to his credit, if you like his shows or not, to his credit, he knows how every CMO operates and knows how they tick and can get in and get those deals done because he's spent the time to appreciate what their business needs are. And there's people like him that I think are being successful, and those are probably people that we end up talking to about other things as well.
Yeah, I think if you look at, MediaCom, we're a media business for sure, but we're constantly meeting with content producers, evaluating ideas against our client roster. And if you look at the example that Paul showed earlier about P&G bringing the Got Talent property to China, like obviously there is a basis of equity in the Got Talent IP already, but when we evaluate an idea like that or content, it's got to be bigger than the show. I think to the point is we're not just looking to throw a logo on there. We're not just looking for let's put some product placement and that's going to be enough. It has to be a bigger activation that fits one of the brands that they can then take into their business environments and do something with to help bring their audiences in and get their audiences to buy their product. And I think so the idea has to be much bigger than just what you can buy in the show itself.
Right.
Well, I think also IP is a really complicated and such a broad topic because I think that it can be so often confused as a vehicle for certain other things, right? So, as a linear content or even an interactive content producer, going to an agency or a brand and pitching your concept, what is it that you really want to achieve? Is it that you just want a brand to come in and help you fund the creation of or the production of your content? Because that's one thing, and the brand is going to want to retain control, and they're going to want to have creative input into that, and they're going to want to help do that. Or do you want to essentially license an existing property that you've already concepted and created, and it's already yours, and now you just want a brand slapped on it and some money, and hope to continue to own the idea and go out in other territories and try and do that with other brands? I think that the latter is almost never happens anymore, and that's what you're describing, which is somebody coming in and saying hey, I've got a great TV show, everyone in my family loves it. Can I get a Bacardi, sponsorship of $1 million if I put the brand on the bottom? That's not going to happen, right? You have to go in, and these are creative agencies or even media agencies want to develop the content because they know their brands better than anybody. Just like Ben Silverman took the time to learn the CMO's motivations, he's using those motivations to create the content perfectly suited that they're going to sign off on. And that's really what you have to try to think of in the conception of IP. It's a joint vehicle when you're talking about bringing a brand in to a certain extent.
Yeah, and just as every network has a mandate that they'll publish and say, these are the shows we're looking for, every brand will have the same thing. That's the strategy. That's the creative brief. And just like if I were to give any advice to potential partners and producers out there, before you pitch your show, ask what the brief is, ask what the strategy is, and that gives you a chance to reset and redefine your pitch based on what the brand is looking for, and you will find opportunities where, the brand may be just like, this is perfect. You nailed it because that's exactly what we need to do in market, and then you'll have better terms because we want that property because we need to go to market with that type of property. So.
That's pretty rare.
Yeah,
Pretty rare that somebody comes into the door and says, I've got a show, it's perfect for AT&T, and I look at it and say, you're right.
So there's an internal development process just as there would be in a network.
In my experience, the best scenario is relationships, like everything else in the entertainment business. It's relationship based. It's keeping people in our seats up to date about what you're developing so that we can say, if you go this direction, we might have some interest. And it's knowing us well enough that you hear often from us about brand strategy updates, because we very often hear something that would have been a great idea for last year's strategy, but it's not good for next. And it's the best scenarios are when we have a good enough relationship that when we're thinking about AT&T in 2014, and we have the very beginnings of an idea, we can go to a producer who we know knows that space, knows that field, knows that audience, and we can develop something together.
Yes, I think when a content producer comes to you with a pre-baked idea, it's like, this is the idea and insert brand here, it becomes a bit of a matchmaking you either have a brand that fits it or you don't, and you can't force fit it. And then it becomes a bit of a, well, what's your reach, and why would I spend money on this idea versus the other 10 million other things that brand could do to reach their objective? I think, for the content producers and people in that business, the real opportunity is identifying the insights or the needs in the marketplace, and then having the conversation with the people who have the brand relationships to co-create something where there's a gap. And I think, in a previous agency I worked at, they had figured out that after the economic meltdown in 2008, about 6 months later, they realized that women were going back to work faster than men, and that men were becoming the primary caregiver. And there was a huge lack of content for the men at home. And so they went and they started looking at how do we go out and create content for this market that doesn't have anything speaking to them during the day. And they created some content with brands around meeting that need. And I think that, to me, is a far more valuable conversation to have with the agencies to identify those insights in the marketplace.
Yeah, that's an interesting example. We're now time to open the floor for questions. Yikes. Any questions out there?
Yeah, I have a question. So in the old world, the producer would covet its relationship with a broadcaster, and advertising agencies would covet relationships with clients, stores, retailers, etc. But in the new world, we as producers of drama or factual shows, we actually care to engage directly with the audience, because these are possibly customers for our future shows. But the broadcasters also want to engage directly with the audience. And I imagine brands do too. So how do you divide up who has the relationship with the end user?
Can I? This is actually a good question, because I think there is an interesting sort of half step where I've seen some properties almost treat themselves like rapid prototype, launch to an audience, see if they can get audience built around it, then use that audience to try and leverage into agencies or especially media companies. I know one property that we work with sort of on a cursory level, some guys who do a show called Black Cab Sessions in London, and they've been able to just make the show themselves, build a massive audience out of it. They actually got a TV show out of their concept. But it's a very tricky thing to build a relationship with an audience, and while you want to own that audience, I think the question you have to ask yourself is how big of an audience can you build compared to how big a brand can build, and how much content can you continue to have in partnership with somebody versus running that community by yourself, and is it actually advantageous to have a partner help you run that community or help you drive that community, because it's a lot of work to do that as well.
And I think, if you look at, as a content producer, you look at the folks at the Epic Mealtime folks. They went out and they built their own audience. They did their own content. They used YouTube to maintain control over what the type of show they want to do. And as they built up that audience, then they started having the credibility to have the conversations with brands and networks to get to extend their reach through other platforms. And I think, so to kind of put it back on you, it's how much control do you want? Because if you're just at the idea level and you want someone to help you fund that to get to an audience, well, you're going to give up some control and access to that audience because you need help getting there. If you build your own audience and you do it slowly, and then you bring that audience with you to go to the next level, then you maintain a lot of control with that audience, because they want the authenticity from you as a content producer, not from the brands and broadcasters bringing it to market.
And if you look at a show like Epic Mealtime, not only are they now selling advertising on their platforms that they're broadcasting themselves on, but they're also selling a ton of merchandise. So they're shipping product and monetizing their vehicle without having to do it through the traditional means.
It comes back to that same point, which is you need everybody to be collaborating. Everyone wants to have a slightly different conversation with the audience, and so you need to make sure people get what they get what they need, and you need to make sure that the person best suited to a specific function is serving it. There's usually either a brand, a producer, or a distributor who have the most credibility in a given production, and they need to be out front and center, because then all three benefit. But it's a balance. The tricky part about all these panels is there's no two projects that are the same.
Anyone else? Okay. Oh, good.
I'm just wondering, you've got presumably a room full of content producers here that aren't typically in the business of producing advertising. And I was wondering what your opinion is on how much brand involvement you can have in a show before the show itself becomes an ad. Know what I mean?
Yeah. I can start. It depends on the, it depends on the show and it depends on the venue. And audience tolerances in different formats are very different. It's become completely acceptable in sports to have logos everywhere. In scripted drama, it's completely unacceptable. There's very much a sort of, I know it when I see it approach. The easiest way to segregate it is brand and product. Putting product in a show is very, very difficult to do without being obvious, overt, and endangering content. Putting a brand's philosophy in a show is very much easier. And so I would try and separate brand and product when you're thinking about it. And if you need to be delicate, think brand, not product.
Yeah, I mean, and Red Bull's a great example of that.
Yeah.
People expect a certain type of content of extreme sports and whatnot from Red Bull, and they're completely okay with Red Bull being part of bringing that value of that experience to them. But they aren't really putting the can of Red Bull into every shot and forcing everyone to drink it all throughout the episode.
Yeah,
Of course,
and I
the
think
logo of the helicopter.
They do.
I mean, the job that I think, like I have at JWT and I know Teddy has at BBDO, is we need to be the advocates for the entertainment value. Because there's a lot of people that are going to think only about the brand, only about the product, and only about the strategy. So I think, you have to really fight for that, just make it as good as possible, And I've been around a lot of projects where they've just turned out to suck because they've lost their way. But
See, I was actually wondering if the brands were getting more sophisticated.
some are like Macy's. Again, going back to Macy's, they get it. They know how to. And there's certain projects where they can probably dial it down, but there's projects where they know the right place, and they understand their place because they know at the end of the day, if it rates well, if it's good entertainment, if it delivers on all these things that they want to be associated with, and you want to spend time with it because it's entertaining, they're going to win. And the brands I think that do that are also the ones that know how to wrap around the content in other places. It was talked about in the other panel. They know how to use social and use it in store and use all the. There's lots of things brands own that they can be heavy-handed with. The story should be a bit more sacred, I think, and the content should be a bit more,
But we're asked to do this for every kind of brand, from paper towels to cell phones, right? It's very easy to put a cell phone in a show and see what people are doing with it. It's very hard to integrate paper towels in a way that, a brand gets any value.
Wait, it's easy to
right?
put in paper towels, but hard to let
Very
people know
hard
what
to
brand
get
it
any
is.
value,
Yeah.
exactly. So, it's a balance. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's tricky and it's very, there's give and take, and we have to work with content creators who agree on that line with us.
Yeah. Is the audience tolerance, you think, higher in digital? Tolerance for integration and brand placement, or?
I mean, at the end of the day, people want good content. People don't want advertising. And so I think if a brand is going to tell a story, back to the earlier points, it has to be about the storytelling. No one's going to want to watch a 22 or 30-minute ad. But if the story is compelling and the brand adds value to the story in how it's integrated, then it's permissible regardless of platform.
But I don't think they're more tolerant. It's much easier to stop watching a YouTube video than it is to stop watching your favorite show on NBC. So,
Right. That's a good point.
I think it's tricky.
I think one more, if there is one. And I think we're out of time. So, there we go.
I was just going to make a quick comment there on your point about putting advertising into the show. I'm just kind of noticing with the PVRs coming out and things like that, it's a lot harder to kind of advertise on shows because people will just fast forward through them. So in order to actually even get the brand onto the show, it almost has to be in the show. And it's kind of almost looks like you're noticing the changes actually happening in the TV market right now anyways.
That's why we're all here.
The DVR is a huge factor. Strangely, I think an even bigger factor than the DVR are the other devices you have in your hand. Now, there's a lot of studies that when an ad comes on, their eyes go to their phone or their iPad, and there's a lot of distractions. Ad avoidance is is very prevalent, and it's not always conscious, and that's why we're here.
I think the key though is like when a brand can accelerate the value of the content or make it more authentic or make it more interesting as a result of that brand's integration, that's lightning in a bottle. You know, when you have 5 snowboard videos in front of you and you pick Red Bull because you know that their level of athlete and their level of involvement and their level of money is going to make that Art of Flight movie just so much better, you're making a brand decision about content because of what the brand's authentic voice is around that content.
I think it's interesting that, when YouTube launched their channels, their action sports channel is the Red Bull channel. So I think if you just do it right, and you play by how the audience wants it, and you can succeed that way.
Great. Well, let's hear it for our wonderful panel here.